technology standpoint, more not from a device or a production standpoint, about this burning area of IoT, Internet of Things. So we hear a lot about the Internet of Things, and I felt it pertinent at this point in time to kind of share with many of the colleges and faculties various protocol standards and technologies that are generally associated with the IoT, and looking at it from a perspective of how they can be used, when they should be used, and where they should be used. Those kinds of detailing. So this talk is more or less a coverage of the hardware specifics in terms of uh, the wireless communication radios, the OS specifics in terms of how do you choose an operating system when you want to develop your own IoT solution, and also the protocol standpoint, both at the network and at the application side, to know uh, what kind of protocols exist and what and where they should be used. So I'll just try to be a little quick because of the shortness of time, but I'm open to discussions if you feel like you want to stop and ask me questions, or we can have it post session as well. So let me not take much of your time and then start. My agenda is very quickly about the internet and the Internet of Things, things that drive the Internet of Things, some hardware enablers for the IoT. When we discuss about various hardware technologies, how do they fall into the category of IoT? And also the software enablers, where we look at operating systems, the network stacks, and application protocols in the IoT. So I'll be touching upon these coverage points and just overview them so that you get a basic understanding and not go into depth, so that you all can explore it at your own leisure later. Now, before I begin, I'll just take a couple of minutes to explain about CDAC. We are, as you may be aware, the Center for Development of Advanced Computing, and acronymed as CDAC. We are a scientific society in the sense that we undertake R&D under the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, the Government of India. And so we are therefore a Government of India organization undertaking research and development in electronics and information technology areas. CDAC has a presence in 12 centers. We are headquartered at Pune, in 12 cities across the country, and we are headquartered at Pune. I work out of the Hyderabad center, which was established in the year 99. We have our own premises very close to the airport in a place called Hardware Park. So this facility has a capacity for about 200 plus engineers. We have state-of-the-art research labs where the engineers work on different types of projects. I'll discuss about that later as we go ahead. And we have also facility for students, classrooms and labs, offering some skill-based training programs in embedded systems, advanced computing systems, software development, and the like. So I myself am probably a graduate from CDAC's PG diploma in embedded systems, and it's given me a lot of confidence and understanding in how technology can be applied to solve problems of need. So our current manpower is generally we have 100 plus manpower, which include the technical and non-technical staff. Now, if you look at our focus areas at CDAC, we have three broad areas of focus. One is professional electronics. This is only the Hyderabad center. So in professional electronics, we look at the embedded electronic system design and manufacturing, which is more a skill development mission from the Ministry of Electronics and IT, and also embedded system design. So I work out of this embedded system design team, and we contribute a lot into IoT applications. So we've developed solutions for agriculture, transportation, and smart cities. I'm keenly interested also in wireless networks, playing around with different types of networks, using them in our development cycles, and also the Linux kernel development. So these are some of the strengths we have at the Hyderabad Center. We are also very strong in the area of cyber security. These are some of the areas we generally look at: endpoint security, malware detection, web security, blockchain, auditing services, and awareness generation. I've also recently started in the area of IoT security, and we have a couple of projects that are running in this area of IoT security, which looks at device level security from various aspects. We also have a strong team on the software technologies, which are more web-based technologies. So we have the ICT for social development, e-learning platform. We have our own platform called the Make Shikshak platform, which is used widely by many colleges and stuff like that. We also contribute to some free and open source software development and other aspects like local language computing, virtualization, cloud computing, and stuff like that. So these are our three skill areas. And whatever research we work at, we kind of translate it into training programs, which can be handed out to various engineering students as part of PG diploma programs, faculty updation programs, and sometimes even workshops or skill-based short-term programs that a lot of people or students and faculty kind of join in, even from the industry, to partake in what we have to offer as far as training is concerned. Now, having said that, let me kind of jump into my main topic, which is the internet and the Internet of Things. If you think about the paradigms of computing that we've come across in our generation or in our lifetime, you will broadly classify them into three types. The first wave of computing, we popularly know them as mainframes. The second wave of computing, popularly we call the personal computing era. And the third wave of computing, we know as ubiquitous computing. So what is significant between the three, or how are the three different? Uh, Mainframes was more a one to many kind of users used to log into those computers and perform their jobs, right? Coming to the second wave of computing, it was a personalized one-to-one kind of a setup. So the generation we created what is called the network interface or the buses, and these allowed communication to happen on a personal level, connected across networks. So that was where the internet really made a difference and started changing the way in which things happen, how things happen. So these networks could be physically in the same location, like in an office, or they could be distributed as well, connected through the internet over the same kind of a network. The third wave, again, its characteristic is more many to one, that you have many computers that are serving one person. For example, if you look around you yourselves, you may be having a smartwatch, you may be having a smart mobile, you may be having a laptop, you may be having a car which runs some gizmo electronics, or a refrigerator. Your smart television may be doing something on as a service. And so the ubiquitous computing era basically proposes a concept where many devices are seamlessly interacting with each other to provide services for its user. So I, as a user, am at the behest or in the control of a network of devices which are actually managing certain aspects of my life, giving me alerts, trying to improve the quality of life, reducing the stress that I have in terms of the mundane that I really bother about in these days, so that I can focus on other things. So this is how the paradigm of computing has been moving. And I just have some inputs on these. Probably at leisure, you can look at it of the three waves of computing. So having said that, the what we are going to discuss today is more from the ubiquitous computing paradigm, which as a term was coined by Mark Wieser, who was working with Xerox in Palo Alto as a research scientist, and that has kind of taken shape into ubiquitous and pervasive computing trends, which we currently witness around us. How did the internet evolve? We believe that the internet began with the internet of boffins. Boffins are basically techie geeks, scientists of the like, and so it was very techie in nature. and then it started moving towards the masses. And so you'll see that previously we had the internet of the masses, where people would go to a specific internet cafe, popularly in India, and access their mails and communicate with their friends and stuff like that. And today, internet has become pervasive to the extent that it is on your device at uh, in a manner that is seamless, in a manner that has become so pervasive that we cannot live without it. It's very difficult for a person to leave his mobile today and even function for let's say a couple of hours. So we've become so addicted to the technology. The future where we envisage 2020 and beyond, already we are in that space, is about things getting into our space and trying to solve problems for us. So this is how the internet seems to be evolving. Now, in 60 seconds, you can look at what are the things that can be done on the internet today. Just telling us that there are about 168 million emails that are sent. There are about this may be more than a million today. This is some old data. Uh, Search queries that happen on Google, downloads of the browser are happening. Music is something that's really catching the imagination of students. So you have online streaming service that are kind of sending music, not only streaming service, but also you can see that YouTube is also uh, publishing a lot of this information in real time. In fact, because of the COVID, this has only intensified much more with all the online platforms and the video conferencing systems making it live on the go every time we want it within our reach. For that matter, I'm very sure Dr. Praveen is also kind of broadcasting this over the YouTube as well, so that he can allow many more people to join in and see. And this is generally the trend of what we get to see about the internet today. What is the Internet of Things? I guess you would have already heard about a lot of this, but I'll quickly run through what my perspective of the Internet of Things is. The term was coined by Kevin Ashton in 1999, so it's hardly 30 years old. Uh, from the definition of the Internet of Things, it refers to uniquely identifiable objects and their virtual representations on an internet-like structure. So the reason why these are bolded is because we want to understand what it means by uniquely identifiable objects and what it means by virtual representations in an internet-like structure. So when we talk about these two terms, it involves firstly a mechanism of identifying objects. Okay, how do you identify objects over a network? Second, once you identify that object, can you remotely monitor that object? And to remotely monitor that object, you have to be able to virtually see that object and assess how it is functioning, right? Third, if you detect any problem with that device, or if you want to even monitor and know what it's doing, you need a mechanism of data communication, that the device should be able to send you some information and you should be able to communicate with that device in a seamless way, in a manner in which it is uniquely identifiable and it's virtually represented on your internet. Fourth, some of these devices may also require you to actuate certain control actions on them. For example, if it's a device that turns on sprinklers, or it's a device that turns on a certain motor or a pump or something like that, we should be able to remotely do those kinds of activities as part of the IoT. So in a nutshell, any technology that allows you to identify objects, monitor them remotely, communicate with them seamlessly, and control them as well remotely is, in my definition, a proper understanding of what the Internet of Things comprises. So moving ahead, we believe, or we anticipate, we expect that a futuristic perspective of the IoT would yield to a point where the number of things in the world will be greater than the number of people. So it's expected that the things, as you can see in blue, is increasing as the time passes, and we've actually breached, or we are very close to the 50 billion devices mark. I think we are somewhere around 42 billion devices that are physically connected to the internet or things that are physically connected to the internet as on date. So very soon it's expected to breach, and probably by the next 10 years we'll have about 75 billion devices that are on the earth. This is a projection that was made by Cisco about the future is how the IoT is going to impact and change the way we live. What is the goal of the IoT? It's previously the ubiquitous computing was more anytime, any place, anywhere communication, right? Now, what the IoT brought into the space of the ubiquitous computing is anything connection. So you have any time connection, any place connection, which is the tenets of ubiquitous computing, as well as any thing connection. So it can happen between PCs, it can happen between humans, it can happen between human and things, or things to things. When I'm saying it's human to human, it doesn't mean direct communication. I'm just inferring that something that's not a PC, probably two mobiles interacting with each other. So this is another definition of what is the goal of IoT, is to bring in that sense of complete ubiquity, that is anytime, anywhere, that's any place, anything kind of communication connections. Again, how is the roadmap evolving? We are now in this phase of miniaturization, where we began with RFID tags in the early 2000s, trying to identify objects. The moment we were able to identify objects, we started kind of communicating with it. Once we started communicating with it, the markets opened up for vertical applications, and moved to the next phase where we want to locate and track devices or people, and that is through ubiquitous positioning. So the ability of devices to be located within premises and without outside premises, those are the kinds of technologies that started coming in. And once all of these started flowing into the device, the next objective was to try to miniaturize the device and make it power efficient, because it has to sustain the vagaries of the environment in which it operates. For example, if you are looking at IoT from an agriculture standpoint, you cannot have the device consuming too much power. You cannot have the device very large, because it will obstruct the farm operations. And you also need the device to best utilize the spectrum so that you get better range and you are able to sustain the network for a long period of time. So we are currently in this phase where we are looking at how technologies can miniaturize and provide power efficient actions and also utilize the spectrum very well. In the future, we believe and we look forward to the physical world web, where software agents and advanced sensor fusion will actually drive the manner in which our operations are run. Operations in the sense our industries are run. So you'll have these software agents that are actually sitting on the device that are sensing various activities, coordinating and giving inputs to us, telling us how best the process workflow or the operation workflow can be stabilized or run to increase the profits for sustenance. Okay, so that's how the technology roadmap seems to be heading as far as the IoT is concerned. How are the IoT systems built, or what is the general building block of the IoT systems? So from its definition, we can just say that it's a system of network devices which are uniquely identified with capabilities of sensing, actuation, processing, and wireless communication. So it means that it has a section for sensing the data, it has a section for processing the data, it has a section for communicating that data through various types of protocols. And once you communicate that data, you tend to use high-end computing paradigms like cloud computing, big data, and AI ML kind of services to understand that data and derive inferences that can be used for various kinds of applications, smart applications, and leading to other intelligent services that you can give your users or your citizens of the country based on the work of these devices. So it could lead to smart home kind of applications, smart lighting, smart cars, and stuff like that. And using the data inferences that are coming out of these applications, you can run intelligent services to provide asset tracking. For example, if you are a logistics-based company, you would want to know where your item is so that your products are, so that you deliver it to the customer in the quickest time, and you also maintain a lean mechanism of stacking up so that you're not having too much of warehousing space consumed because the items are still on the shelf not getting sold. So a lot of intelligent services can be orchestrated based on an outcome of the smart applications that we envisage as the building block of the IoT. From an agriculture standpoint, I'd say in general, a system architecture of an IoT would look like this. You have some IoT nodes that are deployed in the target location, and these nodes will have sensors associated with them, and these sensors perform their respective functions. These nodes allow wireless communication, so you can create networks of them. You can sense your values at respective locations, communicate with each other, extend the network, and send your data to a gateway, which will translate all the information that's coming from a specific protocol into an internet understandable protocol and put it on the cloud. So the gateway basically is nothing but a translator who takes the information coming on a certain protocol and translates it or converts it into a different protocol that can be put onto the internet, an internet enabled protocol. Now, once it comes onto the storage and analysis cloud or a cloud network, you run different kinds of algorithms on it, like decision support algorithms, AI, ML, big data analysis, and stuff like that. And you generate your inferences for your various applications that go to the users who've registered for those services. For if my interest is in agriculture, I can send out good advisories to the farmer telling him what his field requires currently and how he should reach or meet the needs for a better yield as far as the agriculture is concerned. The network topologies in which IoT reside, I generally classify them into three types. You can have a mesh topology. A mesh topology is one in which every node on the IoT is connected to each other. So you can see here that these devices, these circles out here are representative of devices. These devices can talk to each other. All of them are connected to each other, and all of them are connected to a gateway. And the gateway translates the information and sends it to the cloud, which can be then thereafter used by various applications and end users to run their services. So this is a mesh kind of a protocol or a topology that's generally used. The other topology that is very popular nowadays is a star kind of topology. And why do I say it's popular? Is because in a star topology, every device is kind of a standalone entity who talks to the gateway directly. Okay, so only hitch is that he has to be within the range of the gateway. If he's not within the range of the gateway, he'll not be able to communicate with the gateway. But what advantage that does it bring? If I say that the device can connect to the gateway single-handedly, without a network, it means that the device need not be on all the time. So I can put the device into a deep sleep and therefore conserve a lot of power and extend my network for a larger period of time. Because if I want an IoT to be practical, I should ensure that it at least survives on the field for a period of at minimum a year. Because if I buy a device that does not support me for 1 year and requires every frequently for me to change the batteries, the user is not going to be very happy with doing that kind of a function. So practical standpoint, the star network is useful because it allows you to move the device into a low power mode, wake up whenever you need to, and send your data to the gateway and onboard to the cloud. Now, every advantage comes with a disadvantage. And so what is the disadvantage that we see with the star network? It's just that because you cannot interact with other devices, you cannot extend the network beyond the range of the wireless communication standard. So as long as if the wireless communication standard gives you only about 300 meters of range, then all your devices have to be 300 meters in the range of the gateway to which it's communicating. So that is the only problem that we have. But with using the right kind of IoT wireless communication spectrum or protocol, we can extend the range and make sense out of an IoT deployment in a star topology. The third is the standalone architecture, which generally uses a backhaul network like GSM or 4G or 5G. And these nodes are equipped with that kind of a technology to send the data directly to their respective clouds, thereby removing the need of a gateway in that architecture as well. So as we go ahead, you will understand and see some of these aspects in the IoT system architecture. Now, what considerations should you make during the development of an IoT system? What are the things you have to think about before you develop your IoT system? One thing is about the power consumption. So because what is the power that this device or the architecture itself is going to consume, because there can be multiple types of devices. There can be end nodes, which have sensors and actuators on them, and there can be gateways. So how do these devices interact on the network, and how much power do they consume will define what that network can actually do. Thereafter, you'll have to look at the power consumption from the standpoint of what kind of a system and network architecture it supports. If it's a star network, I mentioned you can put the device into a deep sleep and therefore conserve power. If it's a mesh network, they generally have to be on most of the time and or time synchronized, and therefore it puts an overhead on either the amount of power it consumes or the networking, the protocol level support that's required on the device. So power consumption is a key consideration that we have to make whenever we decide what kind of an IoT system we are looking at. The second is whether this is going to reside in a battery-based device architecture or it's going to reside in a normal cloud mains powered architecture. So if it's a battery-based device architecture, as I previously mentioned, the technology has to be practical in nature. Okay, if it's solely on battery-based architectures, because for example, if you say that I'm going to have a smart water meter, and that water meter requires the battery to be changed every 3 months, I am very sure most of the users will not be willing to buy such a system. But at the same time, if you say the battery can last or sustain for a period of 1 year, then there are at least chances that people will look at considering a smart water meter as part of their home infrastructures. So from that standpoint, you will have to ensure that the technology has long battery life. On the other side, if you say that the device is for a smart energy meter or something like that, then it's okay, because you know that you can derive the mains power to power on the device, and so power or the battery life does not become a problem. Wherever possible, it is also important to look at the aspect of energy harvesting through alternate mechanisms like, say, solar energy, wind energy, so that you can develop a sustainable model for field related operations. Third is about standalone operations. Whenever you design your IoT, it should be in such a way that nobody has to go to the field to manually do something about it. For example, if you want to change the firmware of your device, let us say you identified a bug. Now, how will you? It's okay if you have 10 devices, but what if you have 1,000 devices? Is it possible for us to physically go to each of those devices and change the firmware? It's not possible. So how do you ensure that the device can be standalone by itself? How can you ensure that you don't need to, you can remotely access the device and control it, and not have to physically travel to the device to address its issues? That's another consideration that you have to think about. Then there is the cost factor, and cost is generally derived or defined by the market. So if your device is a low market sensitive device, in that case, you'll have to worry about what kind of technologies you use, because the bearing of the technology increases the cost of the device. So these are some of the considerations that you have to think about. Then there's the consideration of how do you deploy and manage the network. So as I mentioned previously, your deployment should ensure that you have remote configuration and you have remote network management on the device enabled, so that you can address issues of the device remotely and, more importantly, in an automated manner. Second, how do you package the device so that it is deployed in the field of operation? Your field of operation may be, it could be outdoor conditions, it could be an industrial place, it could be military grade, it could be a transportation requirement. And so based on this, how do you package your device according to the standards that adhere to that specific application domain? So that's another consideration you need to know about. Again, the cost of the deployment should not be very high. If your device is costing 5,000 rupees and if your deployment cost is costing 20,000 rupees, that's not expected, or that's too high for you. Or what I'm trying to say is, if your device is costing 5,000 rupees, you should make it in such a way that the person who purchases it can deploy it by himself without having to send an engineer physically to the place for deployment. So that's something you have to think about as far as the device consideration is concerned. And the ease of deployment, obviously, where it's very simple it's like a bulb, a smart bulb. You just buy it from the shelf, put it in your house, and it starts working like any ordinary bulb. So that should be the ease of deployment with which an IoT system should be developed. Then you also have to consider the coverage area. How much area does this cover as far as its sensing is concerned? That's a critical aspect, because if you want too much of fine-grained sensing, if you say a farmer has to deploy 100 sensors, he's never going to buy the technology because it is cost prohibitive to him in the first place. So those aspects of the coverage area also have to be factored in, sometimes with a loss in accuracy as well. So you can lose a little bit of accuracy for the sake of meeting the coverage area requirements. Finally, this technology should also have a support for large number of deployment scenarios. That is, IoT generally envisages more than 10,000 devices. Okay, so when you say it's IoT, it's small powered and easy to use and stuff like that. It should also be scalable, in the sense you should be able to put about 1,000 or 10,000 devices easily without the network having to go kaput because of not having the bandwidth support or stuff like that. So you have to think about all these considerations if you are wanting to make a successful IoT system as far as a product is concerned. Now, let me quickly run through some of the technologies that enable the IoT from a hardware standpoint. So I'll just be quick and brief on the hardware enablers that actually bolster or push the IoT story ahead. So if we talk about the enablers, what are the various aspects of the technology space that are seeding the growth of or the spread of the IoT technology? That's what we are trying to look at. So the first is in terms of micro electromechanical sensors, what we popularly know as the MEMS technologies. Now, what are MEMS? It's like taking a sensor and putting it within an IC. Okay, so the nature of the sensor is it's both electromechanical. So there's an electrical component through which you can integrate it with a electrical system, therefore making it quick to respond. And there's a mechanical aspect to it, which also ensures that certain physical parameters that you need to sense are sensed using this MEMS technology. So what does the MEMS technology bring to the seeding of the IoT enablement? It brings in greater accuracy. It brings in easier integration with existing systems. Third, it is dependent on standard interfaces. That is how the processor communicates with the MEMS sensors is through standard protocols or standard communication interfaces, making it easy to develop system software and keep it standardized and portable. These are also becoming digital sensors. So that's interesting. These reduce the cost because once the MEMS technology is standardized, the IC is ready for a MEMS sensor. You can replicate and make it mass produced, thereby reducing the cost. And more importantly, the size of the technology also reduces. So the miniaturization aspect of your entire system gets smaller and smaller, making it very compact and reliable as far as the technology is concerned. Second, we see a drastic evolution in the microcontroller itself. So previously, if 10 years back, probably the number of microcontrollers were very few. Secondly, the microcontrollers did not have full functional capability. Today, however, we are moving towards a paradigm of SoC and SiP. SoC is system on chip, and SiP is system in package. So you have different kinds of technologies, sensors and analog and digital technologies, all being built into one footprint onto which the various functionalities are existing. So you can have multifunctional uh, controllers where they provide different kinds of functionality like analog functionality, digital functionality, general purpose IO, wireless communication functionality, and those kinds of functions on the device. These are also ultra low power consuming. So the latest of processors from the Cortex, the ARM Cortex M series, is quite ultra low power, and the controller itself does not consume or can be put into certain sleep states that allow you to use a normal AA battery to run almost up to a year. These have good memory and flash, RAM and flash spaces. Uh, so you can write better code and have many more variables and functions implemented in your firmware. These are moving towards SoC developments. That is, a lot of different chips are kind of integrated into one substrate and created into an IC form factor. And so that multifunctional nature is coming up because of the SOP and the SiP technologies. These are cheaper, these are smaller in size, and these provide good and adequate processing to the extent that some of the microcontrollers also have a co-processor for graphical processing. And so you can even run AI/ML kind of applications on decent sized microcontrollers without consuming too much of power. So that's how the microcontroller evolution is kind of seeding hardware technology, the IoT space, and empowering the device to get stronger and better. Third is in the wireless communication space, and this wireless communication space is leading to numerous connectivity technologies. That is, you have many types of radios and protocols, and these are standardized and easy to integrate, like the wireless LAN, the wireless personal area network, and low power wide area networks. We'll talk about this as we go ahead. That are giving you different kinds of features, either in a data rate or in the range or in the amount of power that it consumes, so that you have an excellent portfolio of different types of radios that can be used for different kinds of applications. So you can see that the wireless communication space is also evolving and leading to many new radio technologies that are coming into the market, that are being applied in the IoT space, and that are being used for different kinds of application requirements. So moving ahead, some of these technologies that we discussed in terms of the wireless communication radios have translated into technologies of object identification, which is the RFID technology, which is a wireless technology, allows us to identify the object, or for short data range communication, popularly the near field communication technology, NFC. We see this technology on the mobile phones, or even a concept called the wireless sensor networks, which is for remote monitoring and data access. So whatever we defined as the tenets of IoT, as in object identification, data communication, remote monitoring, and actuation, uh, these are fulfilled by these kinds of application technologies like RFID, near field communication, and wireless sensor networks. So when we talk about wireless sensor networks, basically we are looking at three aspects: the sensing and actuation of the technology that it brings in, the mechanism to process the sensing data and the actuation data or remote data, and a mechanism to wirelessly communicate out of the device. So in a nutshell, the enablers for IoT technology are in the physical hardware in terms of the sensors from MEMS, the microcontroller evolution from the processing perspective, and the wireless communication radios that are seeding and allowing the technology to take shape and to mature. Now let's quickly look at each of these technologies. RFID is again under a technology standard called automatic identification and data capture. It uses electromagnetic fields to identify everyday objects through what we called as tags or labels. For example, when I enter my office, I have a proximity card in my hand, which is enabled with RFID. And so that tag or label has an ID which is connected to my name and my employee ID. So the moment I take it to the reader or the endpoint, it detects me, it powers me, detects me, and reads the data from my device to mark my attendance. So as I mentioned, this technology has two components. There's an RFID reader and there are tags, RFID tags. So tags can be in terms of passive tags or they can also be in terms of active tags. Now passive tags basically do not have power by themselves. They use the electromagnetic field that the reader generates to power up themselves and just simply send basic information about the identification details on a small microcontroller that's stored within. The active tags, on the other hand, have a battery, and so they have continuous transponding and beacon facility to be communicated from longer distances and be able to transmit the data to larger distances. So this is how it basically works. You have these transponders that come into the range of your RFID reader with an antenna. The antenna or the RFID reader will send out some energy in the form of electromagnetic pulse. It energizes the transponder. The transponder now wakes up with this energy that it receives, stores this energy that it receives, and uses it to communicate its data to the RFID reader, who will then give it to a PC that analyzes that data and marks various applications like attendance or even detection of a cloth in a mall or something like that as it passes the checkpoint. The RFID application standard operates out of various types of frequencies. So this just kind of summarizes the standards that are associated with the frequency bands, the range, the speed, and the standards that are associated where these applications can be used. So I won't get into the detail of this because it will require its own lecture. RFID, for example, now comes in various form factors, is used in a lot of cases, applications. In fact, even the EasyPass or the toll collection system that we have on our cars right now are RFID tags that you stick up on your dashboard, on your windscreen, and is detected at the toll gate to open to a boom barrier and allow you to pass through. So it's something like this. It's stuck up to the windshield, and then it does its job the moment it comes in range. The next technology is the near field communication. Now, from a standpoint of the technology, both the NFC and the RFID are more or less the same. In fact, RFID is more an application technology, while the underlying implementation of the RFID can be done through a NFC based technology as well. So the objective, however, is a little different. The RFID is used for object identification. That's it. Okay. Near field communication, on the other hand, is used for more short range data communication. So what it means is that while the RFID need not on a tag side need not have power, the near field communication devices are generally powered and they have an initiator and a transmitter kind of protocol, which allows communication to happen between the two devices. So this is more from a communication standpoint. That is more from only an object identification standpoint. The underlying technology, however, may remain the same. So what is this? The NFC basically was defined and governed by a forum called the NFC Forum, which is started by these mobile device companies like Nokia, Philips, and Sony. It is basically for short range wireless communication, distance of less than 10 centimeters or less. And it operates at 13.56 megahertz, the standardized air interface frequency. And you will see that the similar frequency is also defined for RFID. And in that sense, the underlying technology for both kind of remain the same. The data rates are small, 106 to 424 kilobits per second. And it works on a principle of producing a modulated electric or a magnetic field, but not an electromagnetic field. So you modulate an electric signal or a magnetic field, and then you try to interact with the device using that field. So it has two devices in its architecture, an initiator and a target. The initiator will generate the field that powers target if it's passive, and thereafter peer-to-peer communication is possible if both those devices are powered. So there is both possibilities. You can have an active-passive aspect as well as active-active communication as well in the NFC. Now, what are the applications? Contactless transactions, bootstrapping alternate communications, and data exchange. So what I mean by bootstrapping alternate communications is the NFC can become a mechanism to start a third communication, which is a little more long range. So you can use NFC to detect and to initiate a communication between two mobiles. And thereafter, after authenticating the other mobile on the other side, you can then switch or use the NFC to bootstrap or start a Bluetooth communication between the two of them, so that as you move a little ahead, they remain paired and they can communicate with each other. So this is basically some of the applications of NFC. So these are some of the various applications like remote control, where you can operate other devices. You can have a NFC wallet, so you can make payments from your mobile and your payment point of sale device using NFC. It can be used as a key or to pass through doors and stuff like that, and other application use cases as well. So moving ahead, let's just now survey the spectrum of wireless communication radios and the protocols that are associated with them from an IoT perspective. So we all discussed that the wireless communication radios and protocols are an important enabler of the IoT technology. And secondly, there are an overwhelming number of connectivity options today, which is enabling the IoT to be used in various kinds of application domain and serve various kinds of requirements for different kinds of domains. Popularly, we are aware of the Wi-Fi technology, which is a wireless local area network, WLAN technology. It operates on a standard which is defined by IEEE as 802.11, and you have sub spectra in this A, B, G, and N, which have different protocols and different standards. The second is wireless personal area networks. So the wireless personal area networks basically encompass protocols like Bluetooth low energy and low rate wireless personal area networks, LR-WAN, WPANs. And this is defined by a standard called 802.15.x. I'll just talk about it as we go ahead. They are called personal area networks, and wireless personal area networks are the wireless extension of those networks. So popularly, we are aware of 15.1, which is known as Bluetooth or Bluetooth Low Energy, and 15.4, where many people use the term ZigBee to relate to 15.4. But in general, the IEEE only provides the MAC and the PHY, and so 15.4 is an enabler in that sense for the ZigBee to operate on. We'll talk about that as we move ahead. An interesting set of protocols right now that are coming up in the IoT space are generally called go by the name low power wide area networks, and these are more for a wider WAN kind of application, which is also low power in nature. Generally, we think that the greater the range, the more the power it will consume. While that is true, there is also the third element to the whole wireless spectrum, which is the data rates. So based on the kind of modulation you use, you can reduce the data rates to ensure that the power is conserved or lesser power is consumed, while the range is also increased. And that is also dependent on the frequency at which you operate. So the frequency also has another aspect to play in it. As we go ahead, you'll start to understand based on the different protocols how each of these work. Now, the LP WANs are broken down into two major categories. The first category is the cellular or the mobile IoT LP WAN protocols. So these are low power wide area networks, which are popularly implemented through two technologies called LTE Cat-M or the NB IoT. I'll just have a couple of slides on that. I can explain it to you as we go, as we move on. And the non-cellular alternatives. So these are non-mobile phone type of, non-mobile radio type of devices. Popularly, they come under by the names of LoRa, Sigfox, Weightless, and RPMS. So we'll discuss a little bit in detail about this as one of the wireless communication enablers for IoT. Now, the 802.15.x is, as I mentioned earlier, it's a wireless personal area network. And this was fundamentally started from the perspective of developing a computer network that could be used for communicating between various computerized type of devices, right? For example, in your office space itself, today you have a wireless mouse, you have a wireless keyboard, you have a PC, you have a printer, you probably have another set of suites like a telephone and stuff like that in your workspace. The erstwhile technology or the previous technology that we had was all wired. So what did that mean? You needed many more interfaces on your PC. And secondly, every interface had to be wired or connected through a physical wire with the system. Now, therefore, we needed a technology for cable replacement to reduce the number of wires while maintaining the reliability of the wired communication and also ensuring that all these devices can talk over a wireless interface, thereby reducing the number of standard interfaces on your device. So now, when these, with this kind of a mindset, the concept of wireless personal area networks was conceived, that we should have a personal area network for computer kind of system where the communication can be wireless and it's not very long range. Okay. Now, therefore, the IEEE came up with a standard which is documented in the working group 802 with task forces 15.1 to 10. So 802.15 is basically the working group that takes care of the wireless personal area network. And under that, there were task forces 15.1, 2 to 10, which specified different types of application use cases for the wireless personal area network. For example, 15.1 is related to Bluetooth, which we popularly use in our mobile phones. And this was a technology that was specified as a single hop Piconet based technology to have data rates supporting about 1 Mbps, 2 Mbps, and the latest is about 24 Mbps in operating in a 2.4 gigahertz frequency hopping spectrum, spectrum, right? So at the same time, you had 15.3, which also provided high rate personal area networking from 11 to 55 Mbps, which was like an alternate to the 802.11 Wi-Fi wireless standard. Then you also had the 15.4, which is called the low rate wireless personal area network, which has data rates of about 250 kbps, low power, low complexity, a 5-end MAC. So all these other protocols are basically different kinds of requirements from the personal area network space. 15.6 is for body area networks, which we know from a perspective of the healthcare consumer devices. 15.7 is more from visible light communication spectrum on the personal area network. And there are other mesh networking protocols, key management protocols for security, routing protocols and stuff that are specified in the 15.x family. So having said that, let's start looking at some of these technologies. 15.1 is Bluetooth Smart, or it's called Bluetooth Low Energy. Initially, it was called Bluetooth, and then they migrated it to Bluetooth Smart, defined by a Bluetooth special interest group, and it has about 4 standards of the specification. Bluetooth 4.0 is the latest standard, which is called the Bluetooth Smart. It operates at the 2.4 gigahertz spectrum with 40 channels divided into 2 megahertz per channel. Its data rate is up to 1 Mbps with a maximum transmit power of 10 milliwatt. The range less than 100 meters, and packet sizes from 27 to 8 to 27 bytes. It uses frequency hopping spectrum. So because it uses frequency hopping spectrum, the channel it's very difficult to detect or to break this channel unless you sync with the frequency hopping pattern. And this is not compatible. The Bluetooth Low Energy is not compatible with the classic implementation of Bluetooth, which was divided into about 80 channels of operation. So it's not directly compatible. And so generally, what chip manufacturers do, whoever are providing Bluetooth Smart, will also incorporate on the same die of your IC both the Bluetooth Classic and the Bluetooth Smart radios, so that there can be a translation between the protocols as such. Its network is called a PicoNet, and if you extend the PicoNet together, you can create what we call a scatternet. So a PicoNet is something like this. There is one master in a PicoNet, and there are 7 slaves that can actively talk with the master at any given point of time. And there can be about 255 slaves that are temporary slaves or slaves that are remembered by the master but not in active communication. So this basically is a PicoNet. Every PicoNet has one master and multiple slaves. You can have you can create a scatter net by using multiple PicoNets connecting to each other through intermediate devices. So, for example, in this kind of a network, this device.
Hello.
Yes.
Yeah, sir. Somebody has raised a hand.
Yeah.
Somebody from the participant has raised the hand.
Yeah.
Would
Please ask the
you
question.
like to ask some question? DSDA, ASD, someone is there. Otherwise, please, those who would like to ask the question in the meanwhile, they can raise their hand so that I can switch on their mic from my side. I think wrongly the participant may have raised their.
I presume it may have
Yes.
happened. So can I continue?
Yes, sir. Please continue.
So you can create a kind of a scatter net in the Bluetooth architecture where one device is a slave in one network and is a master in different networks. So that way you can kind of extend the network to various kinds of functionalities. Now, when I say extend the network, it doesn't mean I'm extending the range of the network, because all these devices have a fixed range of operation, not more than 100 meters. So in that vicinity of 100 meters, you can have multiple piconets that are talking to each other and serving different kinds of application use cases. We are all aware of the Bluetooth BLE kind of application. So we see a lot of mobile devices kind of using the Bluetooth application. And for that matter, my laptop is interacting with a conference speaker right now over the Bluetooth protocol, allowing me to speak into the speaker and communicate it to you over the Bluetooth protocol. So that is something that is also interesting from the Bluetooth standpoint or the IoT kind of standpoint. Now, the next is the low rate WPAN 802.15.4, which, as I mentioned previously, is the MAC and PHY for the protocol over which ZigBee works. So when we talk about ZigBee in general, we should understand that ZigBee is not a protocol which defines the MAC and PHY layers. Okay, ZigBee adopts the MAC and PHY layer from 802.15.4. As you will realize that as we go ahead, there are other protocols as well that adapt the 802.15.4 as its MAC and PHY. So ZigBee basically is a network layer, and it works over the 802.15.4 MAC and PHY protocol specified by IEEE. Now, what does 802.15.4 give us? Basically, we consider this as the WSN5, and it operates on one of three possible unlicensed frequency bands. So if you look at Europe, it operates in this frequency band of sub-gigahertz, 868 to 868.6, and it allows one communication channel to be existing. In North America, it's again sub-gigahertz at 902 to 928 megahertz. And it allows about 10 channels that can be extended up to 30 channels as far as the standard is concerned. And the worldwide acceptance of 802.15.4 specifies the 2.4 gigahertz range again. And it gives you about 16 channels of operations from channel number 11 to channel number 26 in this space. Now, this technology is based on the direct sequence SPED spectrum DSSS technique, and therefore it also implements good hiding of the data without it being detected. So the spectrum technologies, as you are aware, are probably used to kind of consume lesser power while being difficult to decode or to hack into on the wireless channel as well. Now, these devices have a short range, therefore, about 10 meters, they can be extended up to 100 meters. However, I'd also like to put it on record that there are certain implementations of the 15.4 that use a power amplifier at the output to increase the RF capability and go as high as 600 to 700 meters of single hop communication. Okay, so there are different radios that increase that, but that is at the cost of the power consumed by the device because it's a power amplifier, right? The standard per se is meant to be extendable up to 100 meters and does not therefore comply to too much of power consumption. Looking at the data rate, this has a low data rate of about 250 kbps and therefore consumes low power and requires limited computational power, memory, or even energy. So that's according to the standard. The protocol per se supports two device classes. One is the full function device, and the second is the reduced function device, which we will talk about as we go ahead. A full function device basically has to be on at all the time. It's in certain configurations, it configures or maintains the network. In certain other configurations, it is also it functions as a router. The reduced function device does not have any major functionality, but from the perspective of being able to sense sensors or do sensing operations and transmit its data. So how is the physical stack of 802.15.4 orchestrated? As I already mentioned, the 802.15.4 implements the PHY and the MAC, which are specified by the IEEE standard. Above that, you are free to use any kind of convergence sublayer like the 802.2 logical link control layer or any other convergence sublayer to provide a network access to the layers above it. Okay, so this is the software. This is the stack. This part of the stack is implemented in hardware, and this part of the stack is implemented in software before it goes to the upper layer or the network layer. Now, this is again a similar representation of how a low-rate WPAN application kind of looks. You have different devices which are implemented as end nodes. You have certain devices which are full functional devices which act as routers. So these end nodes are reduced function devices. They can only talk directly to the routers or the full function devices. And these full function devices can communicate with each other over a mesh network and send their data to another device which collects all that information and sends it to the cloud or the or the place where you want to access it. So one of these devices is called the PAN coordinator or the personal area network coordinator. He is also a full function device as compared to the others here in the mesh that you see, which are routers. So now, having said that, I'd like to just move on to the low power wide area networks. So far we just looked at the 802.15.x protocols. We discussed about the wireless protocols like Bluetooth and the 802.15.4, which is low rate wireless personal area networks. But now I'm going to talk for the next couple of slides on the low power wide area networks, LPWANs they are popularly called as, which is a very key and pivotal moment in the IoT technology, because what was seemingly impossible for certain applications in the previous era with 15.4 is now somehow being able to be done using the LP WANs. Okay. So to start off with, LPWAN is acronymed for low power wide area networks. This does not fall under any specific standard. There is no one unifying standard for LP WANs. And so different people have different kinds of implementation for the LPWAN technology. So as I already mentioned, it encompasses various implementations and various protocols. So some of the popular implementation and protocols are LoRa, Weightless, NB-IoT, LTE-M, and Sigfox, to name a few. There are others as well that keep coming up every frequently and bringing certain pros and cons as far as the wireless communication is concerned. What are the characteristics of a general low power wide area network? First of all, it's low power. So it should be able to operate on small, inexpensive batteries for longer durations of time. So as I previously said, the practicality of an IoT is dependent on how easily the user is going to adopt it or how it's going to make the user's life simpler. If I make a smart water meter such that I need non-standard batteries, that is a lithium-ion battery that I fabricate by myself or through a certain company of a certain form factor, it will create a problem for me that if my device does not operate very frequently, if my device does not be very low powered, it will consume the battery quickly, and the user is not able to replace that battery simply because only I have that customized specific battery. So this kind of a technology, if it has to be successful, should operate on the standard batteries that you get in your market. It could be a 9-volt cell. It could be a normal lithium-ion cell that you find for your mobile phone, or it should be a battery that adheres to AA, AAA standards with a certain requirement of power. So one is that this technology should be a low power and operable over long durations. Long durations should generally span more than 6 months and preferably beyond a year. Second, it should also have wide range. So at least 2 kilometers in urban settings. Because if you tell somebody that in every 100 meters I need a gateway, the cost of the technology is going to become very high because it's not scalable, right? It's very difficult to purchase. So you need a wide range technology, which is provided by the low LP WAN range. Now, when the moment we say something like this, there is generally a trade-off. You cannot get everything, the best of all the worlds for free, right? So you have to pay a cost for that. And this implies when you're looking at low power and wide range, it implies you have to sacrifice on the data rate. It means you cannot send too much of data every frequently. So what does this mean? Because of low data rates, you can send only limited amount of data and limited duration of time. Okay, and because I can reduce the data rate, I will be able to conserve more power and increase my range based on the kind of frequency I operate at. Okay, so having said all of this, from an IoT standpoint, it is interesting because you don't need to send too much of data from an IoT. And therefore, all the three categories are kind of solving the problems that IoT generally brings up. So where is LPWAN kind of useful? It's useful in dense locations like smart cities or buildings. It's useful where you want long-term remote monitoring, low power consuming technology devices. Okay, so this is about the low power wide area networks that we generally come across in the latest literature survey of IoT. Now, these LP WANs are categorized into two families. One is technology that is dependent on the cellular or the mobile networks, and the second, the technology that is independent or is separate from the cellular or mobile networks. So, the cellular or mobile IoT technologies implement two standards. One is called LTE-M. So, you are aware that LTE is basically a 4G intervention. It's called long-term evolution with a perspective of increasing the data rate and the availability and communication aspects of the 4G technology, increasing the bandwidth of the technology per se. So the IoT aspect of the cellular or mobile technology has one standard called LTE-M, which is LTE for machines, or it's also popularly called as LTE Cat M1 or LTE-M, which is specified by the 3GPP standard. So this long-term evolution for machines is based on the 4G technology. It's a low power wireless area technology that is an extension to cellular networks to support IoT kind of application use cases. Now, this was published by 3GPP and it's released in release 13 of its specification. And as you may be aware, 3GPP basically is the body which monitors or manages the cellular communication standards. And so they come out with different specifications. Currently, we are in release 17 of 3GPP, and release 15 onwards is basically the 5G technologies for 3GPP. So release 13 was part of the 4G standard. And in the 4G standard, there was a space created for IoT, which is called LTE-M. Okay. Now, what does LTE-M specify as the goals for the IoT? The first goal is that it should provide, this technology should provide about 5 to 10 years of battery life if you're using a 5-watt-hour battery. So most of our mobile phones are 4 ampere hour, and this is talking about a 5-watt-hour kind of battery, even lower. And with that kind of a battery, you should have 5 to 10 years of battery life. Now, from a practical standpoint, you know that there is no battery today that lasts more than 3 years. Within 3 years, the chemistry itself dies out. But this is an aggressive protocol or a standard which says that if you have tomorrow batteries that are able to last for 5 to 10 years, the technology should still be operational on that battery. The second goal is that its cost should be less than $10, which is very comparable to GPRS 2.5G technology. It should have a link budget of greater than 156 dB decibel. What do you mean by link budget? Is the amount of deterioration that your signal can undergo as it traverses the spectrum so as to be successfully received at the receiver. What it means is the receiver of this technology should have should be capable of receiving as low as minus 156 dB of signal strength and still be able to understand what the data is. Now, if you have a radio that can do something like that, you can extend the range to a large distance because attenuation on the spectrum will reduce the signal strength to a point where the radio is still able to access it. Now, 156 dB, the bigger the value here, the better. It implies that the receiver has better sensitivity to pick up the weakest of the signal and still get the data out of it without any loss. Okay, so that's the meaning of the link budget. Now, this technology specifies a variable and low data rate. Frankly, it is even higher than the 802.15.4, which is about 300 kbps or up to even 1 mbps. Its bandwidth is about 1.4 megahertz, and it can reuse all the base stations of LTE that are currently existing. The communication latency, because of its low data rates, is about 100 to 200 milliseconds, which is quite good. And it will support both voice and data transactions. It's deployable in mobile environments with both full and half duplex communication. So this is it implements this kind of a downlink and uplink modulation scheme, which is OFDMA and SFDMA technologies. The other advantage of this technology is that it coexists with 2G, 3G, and 4G, and it's also backward compatible with 4G. Now, so the advantage, therefore, is that you don't need specific gateways. The direct base stations can receive the data and send it to the cloud that requires to send it to. Now, on the other hand, its compatriot is on the cellular mobile technologies, NB-IoT, narrowband IoT, which is generally specified as CAT NB1 or CAT NB2. Again, specified by 3GPP under release 13, specifies a battery life of 10 plus years, low cost, even lesser than LTM, with a budget of 164. Therefore, it's more sensitive, and it's specifically for deep, dense, high penetration kind of indoor and outdoor environments. Its peak data rates are 250 kbps, and practical data rates are about 50 to 70 kbps. Its bandwidth is 180 kilohertz, latency 1.6 to 10 seconds. So you can see that it is slower than the previous technology, and it implements similar kind of communication, but only half duplex. It can coexist with 2G, 3G, and 4G. Again, it is specified in the same release 13 as an alternate technology for IoT, and therefore it's backward compatible with IP. It does not require an additional gateway because it banks on the cellular infrastructure that's already available. And there are 3 protocols or standards in which it can be deployed. I'll just move ahead quickly. What is more important for us if you are trying to choose between the two is to know where and what are the strengths of the two. So if you look at mobility of the technology per se, between LTE-M and NB-IoT, the mobility of LTE-M is much better, and NB-IoT is prescribed for fixed kind of networks. Okay, so if the device requires a handoff and it keeps moving, then LTE-M is better suited for its inherent mobility support. Coming to power consumption, both are low, and NB-IoT is specified to be lower than LTE-M. What about the data rates? LTE-M has higher data rates as compared to NB-IoT. And so based on what kind of applications you want audio and a little bit of video to be transmitted, LTE-M may be better. But if you want just basic data information to be transmitted from your sensors, NB-IoT makes more sense. What about latency? You can see that LTE-M is faster than NB-IoT. The link budget or the coverage is wider for NB-IoT as compared to LTE-M, and the cost is anyway a differentiating factor between the two. Now, from an application perspective, whenever you need mobility, whenever you need real-time, near real-time, and you need good data rate communication, you will prescribe or use LTE-M. Whenever you need long life, you need a fixed network architecture, and you need low power or low data applications, you will prescribe or use NB-IoT kind of cellular technologies. So these are the popular 2 cellular technologies in the IoT space that have been specified by 3GPP. Moving on, the non-cellular LPWANs, the most popular technology is called long range, which is LoRa, and it's a proprietary radio from Semtech. It defines the lower physical layer details, and like the Semtech radio just tells you what kind of spectrum it operates on and the modulation scheme. It operates generally sub gigahertz, That's if you look at India also, we operate at 868 kind of gigahertz spectrum, and it uses chirp spectrum, as I already said. So this is the uplink and the downlink rates for the LoRa range. We have practically been able to get 10 kilometers of long range transmission at a very low power consumption on our IoT devices, which are LoRa enabled. Now, however, the data rate is only 0.3 to 27 kbps, and there are different spreading factors that you can include to spread the signal across that channel. So it's like chirp spectrum is again spectrum. So you spread the channel and spread the data over the channel and have a good receiver with excellent sensitivity or link budget to receive that channel and make sense out of it. Receive the data and make sense out of it. Now, this device, however, requires a gateway to connect to IP networks. A couple of other protocols are Sigfox. I just won't talk much about this because it's a proprietary radio, again operating in 868 megahertz, and it gives you 100 bits per second kind of data rate, operating at very low speeds of 100 hertz, and very less amount of data can be transmitted. However, if you look at the literature of Sigfox, they say that the entire Spain and the European continent requires only 4 or 5 of these Sigfox gateways to receive data from all the devices. So it has very excellent, very high range of communication, but the data rates are significantly smaller. So again, this is a simple star kind of communication where your devices access the Sigfox base station and send their data to the cloud. Now, in a comparison or in conclusion of the LPWAN technologies, from the proprietary nature to the open nature, you will realize that the 3GPP is more a closed standard, which implements the NB-IoT, LTE, CAT-M, and CAT0, CAT1. CAT0, CAT1 are the earlier interventions for CAT-M. So that's a proprietary nature of technology. You have Sigfox, which basically is again proprietary. And I just discussed about it. And there are other protocols like RPMA and STAR-F, which are run by companies like Ingenu and Silver Spring. So these are again LPWAN technology countries. On the far righter side, where it's more open, is the LoRa technology, in which the Semtech radio is closed, but the LoRaWAN network architecture is open and can be used by all of us to experiment and work out. Weightless is another technology brought in by the United Kingdom, and this again is more open in nature, having 3 types of standards, W, N, and P, for different kinds of application use cases. So I just run through this. A final comparison of these technologies will tell us that a LoRa will require LoRa gateway and its own network server before you can get your data on your application server. The RPMA from Ingenu and Sigfox also behave in the same way. However, NB-IoT kind of technology just uses the existing infrastructure to connect to the backend and supply the data to you. Okay. So I just leave you at this for the wireless communication spectrum to later on look at the slides whenever it's provided to you offline. Now, so far we've looked at some of the wireless technologies that enable the software, the IoT space. I'll quickly run through some of the software enablers. The popular operating systems are these. So the questions that are more important for you is what you consider when you choose an operating system. So the first point is you should look at what is the support it provides for various hardware platforms in terms of the microcontrollers, the IoT connectivity, the sensor interfacing and stuff. If you think about what support it has for networking stacks, are the networking stacks integrated and easily integrable in your device? What is the memory overhead of this OS? How much does the OS itself consume in terms of RAM and ROM? What is the language of development? Is it C, traditional C, or it's a different variant of C, which requires its own compiler? or is it a higher end language? That's also important to know. Is it open source or proprietary? Or is it commercially available or it's commercially free? So that's another aspect you have to think about. Most importantly, when you embark on development of an IoT system, does this OS have an active support from its community? Does it have good documentation? Does it update and how frequently? And how do the problems get resolved? How quickly do problems get resolved? So it's a very good step to look at this aspect of it, because if you fail to do that, your your system will not function. You may have an operating system and you enter a technical snag in it and you'll not know how to resolve or come out of it. The next is, does it have debug support? Is it easy does it have an IDE for me to work? Can I flash my devices easily? And does it allow me to easily integrate libraries that are commonly available on the market from different sources to get it operational? You can also ask a question, is it real time or does my application require a real time or general purpose support? And what are the features the operating system provides in terms of task management, synchronization, IPC, and security? At this time, I think I still have many more slides, but if I'm out of time, can you just let me know whether I should stop or whether you would like me to continue? That would be a good indicator.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Yeah. So you want me to continue or should I stop?
Sir, actually, shall we take some questions from the participants?
Yeah, I'm okay with that. Yeah, sure.
Dear participants, I have given rights to you to unmute yourself. If you have any doubts, you please raise your hands. You please raise your hands so that, yeah,
Yes,
Urmila Patel, ma'am. Yeah.
yes. This is Dr. Urmila Patel, sir. Sir, you have really explained all the facets of IoT very well. Sir, only one thing I would like to know, because that is only remaining, the communication protocols. Can you put some light on that?
You're talking about the communication protocols from the software perspective?
Yes, yes, sir.
Okay, actually, I have a set of slides beyond this, but I just stopped because of the want of time. I talk about Zigbee, I talk about LoRa WAN.
Yeah, sir, from the point of view of the various architectures of IoT.
Yes. Yeah, so.
Yes, sir, please.
Yeah, so basically, if you are looking at let's say 802.15.1 Bluetooth, you'll have to use its Bluetooth stack, which implements the network layer in the form of a Piconet. If you're looking from the standpoint of LPWAN, either LoRa or NB-IoT or any other similar technology, you'll have to look at it from the perspective of having their own respective stacks. For example, if you talk about LoRa, LoRa comes with a network layer called LoRaWAN. Okay. Having said that, it doesn't mean that you always have to use LoRaWAN. Rather, you can even write your own network layer using the interfaces or APIs that the LoRa protocol itself provides. So there are some implementations that do that as well. Coming to the 802.15.4, there are three types of network architectures that work over 15.4. One is Zigbee, which is more a PAN coordinated full function, reduced function device architecture. So it has its own mesh networking protocol, or it has its own routing protocol called AODV. Ad hoc on-demand distance vector routing, and it implements the mechanisms for various functions of devices like the endpoint device, the router, or the full function and coordinator to function, operate. Again, on the 15.4, you can also implement a network protocol called wireless HART, which is a highway addressable transmitter kind of. which is basically an industrial communication protocol, which is used in most process industries. HART is a protocol that's used in most process industries, industrial control systems. And wireless HART is the 802.4 implementation of the HART protocol. Now, the third is 6LoWPAN, which is an IPv6 enablement over the 15.4 base. Okay, so you can use 15.4 with the 6LoWPAN technology to have communication over wireless networks. Okay, yeah. So every radio has its own stack, and that stack presents its own network layer, and you can use that for your application programming. Yeah. I hope I've answered your question.
Yes, sir. Sir, can I take it further? The same line, sir. How when we start from the physical layer or start from the lower layer protocols, and when we are choosing the upper layer protocols, how we can make sure, or how do we can make the comparison and say from where we are getting the better performance?
Okay, so you're talking of performance from a standpoint of only the technologies, or you're looking at it from the standpoint of application?
Application, sir.
No. Then if you're looking from it from the perspective of application, you'll have to start top down, because every application has a unique set of requirements. For example, if you talk about agriculture as an application and you want to put an IoT node in a farm, okay, if you take a technology, let's say Wi-Fi based device, okay, you obviously know that it cannot sustain the power requirements of the field, because in the field you're not going to get any power supply or a battery that can run for a year on the field, right? So the application domain itself specifies very clearly what environment in which the device operates and how its network and therefore the protocol should be chosen. So from my experience, when I started doing some work in IoT in agriculture way back in 2007 to 10 and all of those times. During that time, there was no LPWAN technology. So the only low power technology that we had was Zigbee. And we implemented our technology using 802.15.4 with our own wireless networking protocols. And what it did was it created a problem of range and power, okay, which is not there today because I can use an LPWAN technology. So today, if I have to use technology for my agriculture kind of application, because I need power and I need good range, I will definitely go for LPWAN as compared to as 15.4 or Bluetooth kind of protocol. So there itself, the application defines what kind of radio is required. Okay. Now in the LPWAN, you can then decide which makes more sense from a cost perspective, implementation perspective, and ease of operations perspective in the future.
Okay, sir.
Sir,
Thank you, sir.
Excuse me, sir. Nowadays we are using so predefined libraries, which is unnecessarily create a burden on RAM. Instead of this, can you go for assembly language programming, sir?
Yes, but you can always do an assembly level language programming and even basic bare metal level programming, like you take a C and then C program without an OS and run it. But the problem is maintenance and the feature enhancement is very tough. Okay. Today you will not get engineers who can do assembly level programming. First of all, second, to write a simple functionality, you have to write too much of code.
Yes,
which
exactly.
is, yeah.
But it unnecessarily create a burden on RAM. Naturally, the processing time is going to be increased.
Yeah, but again, if you let's say for example, you have 4 sensors and these 4 sensors have to operate independently. Okay, at certain timers. You do not have 4 timers on your system, right? On your controller. So you will need to use one timer and have a software library on top of it, which allows 4 different applications or sensors to use different timing features. And implementing this on assembly level will really be tough. Secondly, it is very difficult to debug where the problem has the code has gone wrong. Okay, so at least in a high level language, you know that, okay, this function is creating a problem, but in an assembly, it becomes very, very difficult to debug because you need a very detailed skill set or engaged skill set of expertise.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
in continuation with this, what is the effective way to implement a watchdog timer?
See, most of your OSs, for example, if you look at embedded operating system, you have the embedded operating system itself giving you a feature of a watchdog. Okay, so what it does is the watchdog is implemented as a task, or a watchdog task is always created, and this task has to run once in every certain period before which the watchdog will reboot. Okay, and whenever the task comes up, he will reset the timer to 0. Okay, so that he resets the timer, and so it does not allow the code to the system to reboot. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much, sir.
Sir, there is one more question, if you permit.
Sure.
Sir, for simulating the application, IoT application, which software is better? Because there are many, so selecting one and getting the result is difficult.
Yeah, so I have not really covered simulation as such. I mean, I've not looked at simulation because we are more into the device kind of development thing. But I understand that there are good libraries from NS2, right? Network Simulator. Yeah, so they have, and then when I was initially working, there was Omnet++, which I used to use for basic level simulations. Okay, this was an open source technology. I'm not very sure
Okay,
when
sir.
that what state it is right now. So I'm probably not the right person to answer this question.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, any other participant would like to ask the question? Okay, I think we don't have any questions from the participants right now, sir, because most of the things you have clearly given in your slides and in your presentation. So, as most of the faculty members have understood the same thing. So, I think we should stop here.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. So from the organizers of this faculty development program from Sri Satyanarayana Maharaj College of Engineering, I would like to thanks Mr. Santosh and Koshi sir for accepting our invitation and delivering the talk on IoT protocols and communication technologies. Even bit by bit details of each and every technology and protocol sir has explained very well. And as we have seen, around 100 participants were there in the session who were listening. Also, I thanks the participants for their active participation. With this, I would like to end this session. Tomorrow we will join at 10:30 a.m. With the session of RFI and EMI for the electronic devices. So thank you all for joining this session.
Yeah, thank you very much for this opportunity. I'm sorry I couldn't cover my slides because I was just speaking too much of the record. But anyway, if you need any inputs further to this, then please send me an email and I'll respond to that to resolve your doubts or questions.
Sure,
Thank
sir, sure. Thank you very much, sir.
Yeah.
So with this, I would like to end this session. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye, sir.